Good evening. I start back in 2003. We were living in Thailand, and this is my family, Kate and Charlotte and Jeremy, the mid-noughties, I like to call it. We lived in Phuket, Thailand, which is on the west coast. Some of you may know it, small island about the same size as Singapore, where we live now, which is further on down. In 1999, after a lot of surveying and researching, we purchased a greenfield site on the west coast of Phang Nga province on the Andaman Sea. Sea level, very beautiful, water buffalo and nature around, and very little else in the vicinity. It was a true greenfield site. We were younger then and we had a dream. The dream started. It became a project to us. It started with the support of friends who we knew in Hong Kong, who, when we said, hey, we're going to go and try and build a resort in Thailand, they were energized and said to us, brilliant, we'll love to come. What a great idea. We support you. The whole period in our lives was sort of an entrepreneurial energy with people around us endorsing our rather crazy dream. The crazy dream started and it became a project. And we, on our site with our design team, we created and we mapped out how the resort would look and feel. Picture here of simply where the lobby would be, the Ficus restaurant behind on the way through to the beach. I remember very clearly with Kate leaning into a telephone on our conference table as employees number 1 and number 2 and talking to Kun Suchai, our insurance broker in Bangkok, and saying very clearly to him, so act of God, are we covered for absolutely everything? You know, floods can be biblical and worldwide natural disasters can be apocalyptic, but are we covered for absolutely everything? And we needed to be certain that we were safe, and we checked with him that we would be covered and our risk would be managed. And he was very clear, Chai Kap Kun Andrew, Tuk Sing Mai Penrai, everything is covered, do not worry, it is fine. Yes, your policy is for act of God. And indeed it was. Thai baht, lots of zeros, but we were covered for act of God, and it was something that we knew that meant we were fully covered. After some rounds of design and detailing and tendering and contracting, we moved to be able to put the first piles into the ground, and we celebrated that milestone moment as only one can, with a glass of something sparkly and cold in a beautiful place in Thailand. Slowly, the Sarojin started to emerge, and I can just recall every day being tremendously long and challenging. It was new to us. There was lots of driving. We didn't live near the resort, but our team were around us in Phuket, which is really where you could be based to build a resort because there was resources on hand. We were parents, and our son was learning to walk, and our daughter was learning to dance. We worried about a lot. We worried about cash flow, and we worried about our next steps, the decisions that we were trying to take. Were they the right ones? We worried about things for the family, the birthday party entertainers. We always worried whether there was enough money in the system. The whole thing was a crazy dream. It was utterly exciting and invigorating, and at times a bit scary, but we were truly committed and dedicated, and I like to think responsible. We had the support of our Filipino helper, Tess, and without her, I suspect much of this would have just simply not been manageable at home and for us. The resort was, as I said, 104 kilometers north of where we lived, and that was a daily commute on roads that are a little bit challenging, but nonetheless have improved since then, I hasten to add, but nonetheless a fair distance to go to and from. And slowly but surely, the resort emerged. And on the 24th of December 2004, we were looking at this. Guest blocks, ground floor garden and pool residences and suites up above. The gardens had been more or less finished. The swimming pool was full and looking at its best. We had a Thai spirit house, and our staff, we now had 101 who had been recruited in Phuket and moved up to help us set up the resort. And they, on a daily basis, would pay homage and respect to the spirit house. Spirituality and life came to a building site. And that was important for all of us. Kate and I had not many days off. If we did, it would tend to be possibly a Sunday. We may go to church with young children or spend time with them. We would share communion at critical festivals at least, sand in your feet Sunday brunches, We'd swim and build sandcastles and have time with our children. Kate's parents had visited us when we got married in Hong Kong in 1994, but they'd never been to Thailand. And they decided one decade on that they had booked to come out to see us, to see our, or the new international grandchildren, our new home and the nearly finished resort, and wanting to celebrate Christmas in the land of smiles with us. Not wishing to chance a soft opening of the resort and perhaps unforgiving guests at peak time or festive season, we had decided that, coupled with Kate's parents coming out, that we would only welcome guests on the 16th of January onwards. And so in late December, with Brian and Hazel coming and Christmas Day falling on the weekend and the finishing touches of the resort requiring our everyday presence and decision-making, we decided that if we were not going to be there, in truth, the staff probably ought not to be doing things that we might have to undo one day later. So we agreed that everybody would have the weekend off. On Christmas Eve, Kate and I, when the staff had gone and those workers that we had, a handful who were doing touch-ups, had also gone, we sat in the Ficus bar, this is it, and we had for the first time a cold beer together to sort of celebrate a milestone again of where we got to, and Christmas coming the next day. I look back on such sort of serendipitous moments where we'd agreed that all the staff would come back on Monday the 27th. And with the benefit of some hindsight, I sort of regard it possibly as a God incident, a coincidence that's relevant to my relationship with God. It was sunset on Christmas Eve and everyone had gone and we moved to the beach, which was beautiful. And that's it. And then we left through the resort, turning off the lights as we went. And we went off, drove back, the security guards waved us off, and we went off back to Phuket to celebrate Christmas with our family. It was the night before Christmas when we were there, and all through our house, with excitement and anticipation, we shared Christmas as a family. Father Christmas did come and left talcum powder footprints, and the children shared with their incredulous joy. We gave and received presents, much like any family would do, but in our case, we played on the beach. We shared a somewhat untraditional Christmas lunch of more mango and seafood than sprouts and turkey, but it was a perfect family day with Kate's parents. It was a beautiful, calm and high season, and we could, in truth, not have been happier. On Boxing Day, we had the full and exciting day planned to go to Coral Island, and we chatted as we drove to the long-tail boat departure point in the morning. Kate's parents had earlier felt and mentioned a house tremor, a shaking. And midway through the journey, my pager that I had on my belt buzzed, and a little illuminated screen scrolled a message, which when I stopped the car, I looked at it, and it was from the site manager at the resort. And the message said that the sea has risen 3 or 5 meters, the resort is destroyed, and the casualties are unknown. I stopped the car, tried to process what I'd just read, tried to put in context what we were talking about, and sort of sensed that there was a tidal surge, a sea mess, and we turned back in haste. And Brian and Hazel said that they would take care of the children with Tess, and Kate would stay in Phuket, as that was a better basis on which to understand what was going on and to manage operations, if you like, and I would head up to Khao Lak. The phones were dead, the television hadn't picked up anything yet, there was no news of anything anywhere, and I set off to depart for the resort. Ordinarily, I'd go up a route up that yellow line, and then I'd go up straight up the west coast to the resort. But when I moved into Khao Lak, the road was blocked and impassable with debris and sand and mud and a twisted mess. And I detoured inland and came round by Tak Kua Pa Hospital. I passed the regional hospital, and it became clear at that point from people that a tsunami had happened. A reminder of the magnitude of a massive earthquake, one of the largest recorded just off the point of Banda Aceh in Indonesia. And those areas in red are the areas that were mostly affected. For Thailand, the area that was mostly affected was Khao Lak. We didn't know that at the time, but we found out as the days rolled forward. I ended up coming round into Tak Kua Pa, and I passed the hospital. And the hospital, normally quiet, it's a small industrial, unattractive looking building, had many people waiting, Thais waiting and gathering. And I stopped, and my Thai is not too bad. I'd been to school in the morning for nearly a year, and learnt enough to be able to converse and better understand what was going on. It was about 11 o'clock and pickup trucks started to arrive, and they were driven by Thai people, but they would be carrying Thai people or foreigners. They'd be carrying a child or a mother or a husband, Thais and foreigners alike, and they were badly damaged, broken, bleeding, injured people. The noise was not good. Where is my husband? I've lost my wife. I don't know where my child is. Where's mummy? Where's daddy? It was an indescribable anguish and pain. And there was a sort of genuine sense of dread at what was clearly realizing itself to people who were in it and those who were now trying to understand what had happened. There is a film called The Impossible, which was filmed the following year, much to my deep annoyance, because it put back in all our faces what had happened. But if you like, the thing of the film is it centers in the hospital and a story there, and the depiction of what was going on is pretty much as I remember it, and I remember seeing it and being there. And so there is some semblance of obviously truth, despite the story being a little bit more Hollywood than the case. The hospital was small, 177 beds. It was local, it was a public government hospital, and it tried to process admissions. Hundreds of people were arriving. Over the coming days, 10,000 people were injured or treated or managed through this facility, an incredible achievement. I met up with an Italian restaurateur, Ramon, a local guy. He was okay, I was okay, and we set about trying to manage tourists. We'd paint pictures or draw pictures of flags, and we put them on the wall, and we put the Swedish people with the Swedish flag. We'd group a mother with children and say, could you look after each other or help them or talk to them? We tried to cluster people and take names and phone numbers. Nobody knew phone numbers. I can remember my childhood one, but I can't remember my mobile one. Nobody knew passport numbers, but we kept lists of names of the hotel they were in, the room number, who their husband was, if he was missing, and nationality. And we generated lists upon lists with others, and we set up a sort of an admin center to try and knit together who was here and who was with who, or who was missing who. And this went on all day, and people arrived, people died. It was messy, it was deeply uncomfortable. It was nothing prepares you for this. There's no training in my world that has helped me for this. It was sort of fueled by just a energized desire to try and almost put out flames and help. And the enormity of the hurt and suffering was just massive. It was a scale I've never seen, I'll never see, I hope ever again. It was stressful, it was distressing. And by the end, or towards the end of the day, about maybe let's say 5:30, I felt sort of utterly overwhelmed by everything, as I suspect others did. I needed my own space. I needed to breathe. I somehow had to step away from this, and I needed to see the resort. I had to know where our staff were. Everything was just a disaster. And the result of that was that maybe sort of 6 o'clock, I left, and just before I left, I met Kun Mi, one of our staff, and we agreed that we put a sign on the flagpole of the hospital. That's the hospital flagpole. And we put a sign that said, Rotini Rajaklap Manakap, which is wait here, Sarojin staff, and we will come back for you. And she would stay, Kunmi, and we'd try and amass our staff wherever they were and wherever we could get messages to them. The devastation in Khao Lak was everywhere and obvious. You drove through this everywhere. It was utterly shocking. We've seen sights of this similarly on our TV recently, all of it very distressing and disturbing. This was the result of a single moment in time, and flanked then by blue sky and perfect warmth and high season. Twisted, damaged mess. The resort was no different. I arrived, and that's a picture, I think, through my windscreen, of the sense of arrival. Just broken, damaged. The ficus restaurant where we'd sat washed away and sort of blown apart. The rooms were no different. Everything was a twisted mess. The buildings to some extent were standing, but walls had been blown through and doors had gone, and just some of it washed away literally. The beachfront had gone. That's our restaurant, or the foundations of it, ripped out and exposed. The kitchen and the toilet and washroom, cloakroom block on the right just smashed apart and the ground disappeared out to sea. The aerial view that came subsequently, a few days later, I think, showed the extent of the damage around us and how this sort of was washed through. Some structures survived, but in truth, the landscape had changed. The water and the sea had gone in 3 kilometers inland. A devastating outcome. I went to the beach, and when I got to the beach in the evening, it was perfect. It was flat calm. There was no debris on it. It had been washed inland. There was no footprints. There was no sun loungers or umbrellas. There was no sound. I remember it being completely still. There were no birds. There was no cicadas in the trees making a distinct sunset noise. And the Andaman Sea lapped, and the sky was a perfect heat, hazy, flaming color. In truth, it could not have been more beautiful or perfect. And I think that image that I had on the beach when I looked that way was very reassuring and important to me. Subsequently, when we made some decisions, looking inland, it was devastation and a mess. But looking outwards, it was God's beautiful creation. We'd had no weather forecast or warning. There was no build-up or threatening skies or any sense of impending doom. The sea had literally risen through the trees and came through the resort and swamped everything. That is our resort, and the sea came through at about 5 meters through the entire resort, flooding, washing everything. It washed in, washed out, washed in, washed out. It took everything with it and everything in its path for kilometers inland. The back of house was drenched and damaged, and there's some people on the roof, and there are security guards and 2 workers who were able to clamber up some scaffolding we had in the rear to survive. And in the immediate vicinity of Khao Lak, 4,800 tourists died that morning in that incident. A massive number, and something sobering when you survive, that to me, I look back on it and I look at any other normal day at work, we would have been there and we weren't. And it strikes me that we survived and we were fortunate. And at times that very thought or knowledge shocks me. I look at children who are now 19 and 22, and I think their lives would have been very, very different had we made some different decisions or judgments over that period. Back at the hospital at 1 o'clock in the morning, the rendezvous had worked and we'd amassed staff, and we brought them back to Phuket in 2 trucks with some fried rice baskets of food that we'd arranged. And people came back towards our home in the center of Phuket, a safe place. Many of our staff were new to this area of Thailand because they'd come from other places in the country. We got back at 2:30 in the morning to our house. Kate had been very well organized and got things sorted, and she'd taken over the boarding house dormitories in the local international school. They were obviously on holiday, and she borrowed clothes and toiletries, necessities from the local community, and got food organized. Everybody in Thailand can cook fabulous food, but it was there and it was comforting for all. The phones weren't working. News was starting to broadcast what had happened, and terrible images from other places in Southeast Asia. Our house was full and it was hectic. It was tragic. It was noisy. It was chaotic. The children were comforted. They knew nothing, but there was just people, and they were little, and people wanted to cuddle somebody, so they got cuddles. And all of a sudden, at about 3 in the morning, the phone rang. I was there. Everybody stopped. The phone had rung, and I went to it and I picked up the phone. And this is what happened. I got, "Andy, thank goodness you're there. It's Rob here. Are you and the family all okay? I had to call you to find out." The Rob was Reverend Rob Gillian, now Bishop Rob Gillian, a great family friend and a vicar for us as a family. He married us, he baptized the children, he's blessed the family, he's comforted and commemorated my family over many years. And we talked for a little bit about what had happened, and I can't remember all of what Rob said, save for what he said that made a real and important and lasting difference at that time. He said, "This might be the wrong time, or this might be the right time. But consider this, if there were any 2 people who are capable of working to help your community recover, it is you 2. And having been spared, and despite all that has happened, you are in the right place and you're meant to be there." It was terribly important what he said to me, because I really didn't know what I was doing or where I should be. But I felt a sense of responsibility. And before we ended the call, I said to Rob, how on earth have you got through to me? And he said, I don't know. I was in prayer, and I was praying because I'd heard the news, and I felt I wanted to call you, and I needed to, and I picked up the phone and dialed you, and you answered. And I look at that as a true God incident. I can't think of anything else. And for the next 2 days, we didn't have a dial tone in the house. That night, Kate and I talked, and we reflected on Rob's comment and everything we'd considered and seen. And there was so much to think about. And to our minds, the very reasons for building the resort, in fact, hadn't really changed. And I looked at that beautiful sunset I'd seen. It was a beautiful beach in Thailand, and that was the same post-tsunami. And we stood on a couple of chairs, and we knew we were insured, and we knew that we were fully protected. And we stood there, and we were safe and sound. And we turned to all our staff, and we said that we would build a recovery plan, and that we would open the resort within a year, and we would pay them a salary, and we would help them get home. And over the coming few days, that's exactly what we did. There was so much to do and action and manage and understand and protect. And we arranged for things like, I arranged for a military truck to come and protect the resort so that nobody could loot it or make it worse than it was. We assisted with families who were missing people that we knew. We spoke to the insurance company, the loss adjuster, and we moved forward the plan for the claim. And we convened building contractors. I locked them in a room and got them to sign new contracts to build it again for the same bill of quantities and the same cost. And we got the salaries, and we said goodbye to the staff and put them on buses and sent them off, saying we would call them back in a short period of time. And by the 31st of December, within 1 week, we had done all of this. And I learned later that for businesses that did not open or start again within 7 days, 70% of them simply do not survive or did not survive. And that statistic, I think, is one that lasts and lives for similar such tragedies. We were quick, we moved quickly, we were desperately energized, but we knew that we could do it. We had responsibility to act, and we moved forward to try and make a difference. And after a few weeks, we contacted the staff and we got them back, and 78 out of 101 came back. And we agreed that we would stay together, we'd rebuild the resort. For some, coming back to the coastline was just too much. Their family weren't comfortable and they weren't going to do that. But for many, they did. And everybody came back. Sadly, Kun Mam, our human resource manager, lived in Khao Lak in her own house, and the house was destroyed, and she was killed by the tsunami. A tragedy to us, an absolute loss that we all, as a company and as a newly formed bond of people and workers and friends, felt deeply. But the tsunami did not differentiate anybody. It swept all religions, all people, Thais, Buddhists, Christians, Jews, Muslims, everybody, locals, travelers, rich and poor, young and old. It impacted absolutely everybody equally. They were all affected wherever they were in a similar way. Some of the Thai community felt that perhaps that the natural disaster was something that they had brought about themselves with a lack of respect, maybe, or care for the coastline and the speed of rapid development for tourism, its unsustainable nature, possibly. They felt a sense of guilt. To me, I didn't feel that. I felt it was a random and natural event, one that could not have been avoided, but one which, had we had the benefit of some experience, or had we read nature's signals better, would have lessened the impact or loss of life. Greater awareness and knowledge we have now, but at the time there was nothing. The signs were not there. Local animals saw them, and they moved and got away into safer places, but we didn't. Men and predominantly men were disproportionately lost in the tsunami. They sort of stood and stared and watched and tried to rationalize what was happening and assess the risk. Mothers and children tended to move quicker to higher ground. We personally knew 4 family groups who were staying in Khao Lak, and 3 of those families tragically lost their husbands that we had to find and assist for the repatriation, identification and repatriation. The tsunami you've seen was, as 2004 in Sumatra, massive 9.3 earthquake, 1,000 kilometers of seabed split and moved, a massive amount. It came on shore at 80 kilometers an hour, huge speed for water to come in. It took 98 minutes to get to Phuket, a little bit further to Khao Lak up the coast. And in Khao Lak, it was a 5-meter but rising to 11-meter high flood that came 3 kilometers inland. Understanding what happened was just terribly important to us and our team, and a greater understanding enabled us and educated us to the staff as to what happened. This huge seabed movement and the split of 100 meters, 11 meters upwards, over 1,000 kilometers long, caused the movement of water. And understanding that helped us greatly to rationalize our fear of a repeat. Reinsuring the property was actually okay, and our premium was lower because the perceived risk was in fact less. And this point we shared and made to our business partners, that Khao Lak post-tsunami was safe. It was a safe destination. But aside of this knowledge, we had to address our spiritual well-being, and everybody turned to a slightly greater being and to each other, and we shared and engaged in each other's faiths, and we worshipped and we prayed together. For the Thais, Buddhism, family, the community, reincarnation, helped them greatly move forward and collectively cope with their losses and gain some closure. Our international outreach was also important, and people in our Christian communities that we knew around the world wanted to help and were really generous, amazingly so. And globally, people wanted to give to charities and organizations, and Thailand managed the clear up and things brilliantly internally. They were awesome in terms of mobilization to help solve what was an utter tragedy of a big scale. People donated and wanted to donate through us so that we could administer locally and make best use of the funds they got. And on that basis, we set up the local community, or what we called the Sarojin Khao Lak Community Fund, which we administered with the bank manager and the local village chief to make sure that everything was transparent and accounted for. And that's still the case today. And the fund supported a great deal locally. It helped the Red Cross for the provision of some prosthetic limbs. It helped us establish an orphanage, which was important to us, and we built the first classroom. It employed a vet because there were homeless cats and dogs everywhere. It funded and coordinated some rural lights for the roads. It was really dark at night and people were fearful, and lighting was important. And we helped put some of these on some of the side roads. We also created the Pakarang boatyard. We needed to get fishing fleets back and tourism boats back, and people needed jobs, and building this fleet seemed like a good task. I know Peter has got some more small-scale model boats, and we made those and we sold them later on and raised money to help fund real boats, big boats. All of this happened, and here's Scott Carter and actually Rob Gilliam when he came to visit. And Scott and his then girlfriend Wendy, now wife, who's now in Canada, helped build the boatyard, and they were brilliant. We built hundreds of long-tail boats and we launched them. And with the local authority, they did the allocation of who would get the boat. We just coordinated funds and made them so that we didn't upset anybody locally. Meanwhile, Kate was traveling across Europe and the UK and working tirelessly and tearfully. She had to convince the world that a holiday could be had back in Khao Lak and Thailand, and that it wasn't too soon to travel. An impossibly challenging task, very demanding, and emotionally she cried a lot and was upbeat with people, but walked out of the door and sobbed. A mindset of business people who just looked at you couldn't come and have a holiday, it wouldn't be right. People wouldn't be happy. And we had to paint a picture that it was actually what we needed. They needed to come and have a holiday, and we'll make it good. It was a massive challenge. She didn't discount the room rate. She didn't tell people there's a problem. She said, no, you're going to pay good money because it will be good and it will be ready, and there's no reason not to. And that was an important thing for the recovery of the destination. It didn't cheapen itself. It didn't give itself away. It held on to its value, the quality, and people ultimately were happy to pay for that. It occurs to me that tourism, when you move into an area, the backpackers have been there first, and then 2-star, 3-star, 4-star, 5-star hotels arrived from the bamboo bungalows that started it. But after a disaster, the opposite is true. It's the 5-star, the more established, the international, the better resourced or funded properties that can come back first and help restore confidence. And in 2005, it was the Sarojin and the Meridian that were the first ones to welcome any guests. We cleaned up a lot, our kitchen that was just washed through and broken. We salvaged and we worked with a team. I was much busier being busy and digging and shoveling rather than thinking. But there were setbacks. It's a picture on a Monday morning. We printed the banner on a Friday before. We had a bank that wouldn't give us our insurance money. They didn't trust us. They thought we'd run away with it. And the only way, I cried. I had to pay people. It was the end of the month. There was nothing I could do. If I didn't pay them, they would leave. Contractors would go. I was almost and utterly broken at the distrust of someone who was trying to make something work. And we took people in black shirts outside the bank and we picketed to release our insurance money. We did succeed and the money was released. It was a very un-Thai thing to do. I felt very vulnerable, very scared, very unhappy to be doing something like this in a country that is a little bit different from this Western world we're in today. The bank relented and they remain our bank today. Never make an enemy, my mother used to always say, and they still remain our bankers. But we couldn't afford to keep the construction company. The insurance company would only pay for one construction or project management group, and Bovis Lendlease, who built it first time round, wanted more money with less people to do the same job. And I had all the staff and we said, okay, we know who we're going to keep and what we're going to do. And the staff put on their hard hats and we said goodbye to Bovis Lendlease and we formed our own construction project management company. We'd seen the resort, we touched it and felt it, and we were going to put it back better than it was. We formed an organization structure with the spa manager overseeing the landscape contractor, the housekeeper overseeing the interior designer, and the front office manager overseeing the project administration. It was a brilliant team. It worked together well, we communicated well, we were of one mind and focus, and the resort was delivered on time. It was slightly under the insurance claim budget. We'd claimed 96%, almost total constructive loss, and we came in on 94% to rebuild and reopen and deliver the resort. Spiritually, a timely arrival by Rob was important for me and Kate. He came with money that he had raised in a London diocese to build boats. He came to help us and conduct us blessing and a spiritual wellbeing service at the resort. Our staff joined in. They sang hymns they'd never seen before. They prayed with us together. They shared in our worship. Nobody minded. It was all about being together. It was all about something much bigger than us. It was about fellowship. It was about love. It was about looking after each other. We worshipped and we also broadcast. And this is Rob, he's on our beach on my phone, broadcasting live on Radio 2, Pause for Thought from Cowlack with Chris Evans as the DJ. Cowlack was coming back and he was able to tell the world, come and have a holiday. The year was turning and we would try and be ready. The construction workers and our staff had not really been in a hotel for 2.5, 3 years because it had been built twice. We needed to get the resort ready. And so Kate and I came up with a cunning plan where we had a ruse that 120 guests from Phuket were going to come as VIPs and stay. And the staff would have to get the place ready. They got uniforms together. They filled everything up. They brought food. They polished and they prepared everything for the VIPs to arrive on the 22nd of September 2005. And that evening, the staff lined up to greet the first minibus. There's a fleet of them that were arriving, or so they thought. But in reality, there was only one. And the one that arrived was my family. And they arrived and they got, that's Tess, my daughter, and Jeremy with his bear, who's still very much part of his life. And that night we had a very special evening. We stayed together and we shared together. We said there's nobody else coming. Everything they'd done was a preparation for us to be together and for one night only to celebrate in the resort a happy time a joyous time. We gathered together and we spoke and we shared and we had tremendous food. And later that evening, Kate and I, with the help of our little daughter, awarded and bestowed upon those staff, 56 of them, who had come back and stayed with us through to opening. We named the rooms in their honour. And Kunchailai, our housekeeper then, executive housekeeper with her room, forever known as the Chailai Suite. My emoji is over the front of it. The resort felt different. The staff had a great sense of ownership. It felt loved and lively. There was pride in everything they did. A unique hotel school. A detailed corporate business plan that we built and dotted I's and checked paybacks and internal rates of return and everything had quite literally been washed away. And we were left with a far simpler plan that catered on the special people we had in a unique place. It was absolutely bound to succeed. This was what we had, our team who opened the resort. And it worked, and we moved forward to Christmas and people came, and Kate had sold the rooms quite correctly at proper rates, and people came expecting a lot and they got it. And they came for New Year and they dressed up and they had cocktails and orchestras on top of the restaurant, and they went through to the beach to dine and dance. And on that moment, as they all walked onto the beach, we gave each one of them a glass of champagne. And Kate and I looked at each other as a sort of impossibility had been made possible. Perhaps it was therefore no real surprise that we were bestowed an honour of being an Asia's leading boutique resort. And we had to go and collect the award, and we flew off to America to do so. Why not? Life had been miserable, but we wanted to go and do something that made us feel good. And off we went. And as miraculously, we were there in the airport lounge of JFK Airport, and Kate picks up Condé Nast Traveller, and that's our swimming pool on the front cover. We were there. We'd made it. Excuse me. We were back. And we were alive and we were good. And we moved forward, and on the anniversary, as we still do, we held a multi-denominational service. Our children were always part of it. It was family. They were there on the day of tragedy. They've always been there for a variety of reasons. And Charlotte now is an aspiring director of the company and brings young talent to an aging pool of directors. But she knows the values of the Sarojin. And the memorial service was important, and it still is, to guests that came in, to people locally. And we have a Thai blessing, and we have a multi-denominational service as well. And we release komlois, a traditional way that the Thais release spirit lanterns into the air with their wishes or their blessings to travel to the place where it is needed most. And so that's really my abridged story. That takes us through to a point in time where we were open again for the first time, and we were full with the right guests, and our staff were proud. And I suppose I look back, and faith and my belief in certain things was terribly important. And as a Christian, it stems from my own childhood home and through my Christian union at school, university, and Anglican churches in Southeast Asia, where we've shared fellowship and friendship. And its strength at times. And I've always maintained some belief, or my belief, that death is not the end, that the gift of eternal life has always given me hope, that coming to know God and saying and doing what is the loving thing is a core belief in my life. And equally, I believe that a loving God can permit earthquakes, consistent with laws of physics. God enables the freedom and movements of Earth's plates. And I do not believe that God created the tsunami, nor did he destroy 150,000 people. Noah's flood may have been a different thing altogether, but I resolve that it was the freedom of choice or randomness that caused this terrible tragedy. And the natural laws that operate in our world ultimately led to this tragedy. And to me, that God could not intervene and affect that free will. Nature can be a blessing and a curse. Our cells replicate and allow us to grow physically, and we develop, and yet the odd one can result in cancer where natural processes misfire. There's blessings and there's curses. And reconciling where God was in all of this was important to me. For some, suffering can lead to an abandonment of belief in God, but not for me. For many others, the opposite was true. Pain and suffering are perhaps crucial to Christianity. And as C.S. Lewis penned once, that God whispers to us in our pleasures. He speaks in our conscience, but shouts in our pain. It is his megaphone to rouse a deaf world. And at times in the darkest and the most traumatic moments of the disaster and the immediate recovery, it sometimes seemed to me inconceivable that any good could come out of it. However, I had hope, and it became clear to me that our very existence in the aftermath made a real difference in many ways to others within the community and far further afield. Indeed, Mr. Debashi, our Japanese manager, wrote a book, Rebuilding a Business After the Tsunami. It became a university study text, and I understand was very helpful in Japan when it suffered a similar tragedy. Equally, I recall meeting in our restored lobby a few months afterwards, a Swedish family who'd lost their daughter in the surge. And I was able to spend time with the parents, devastated parents, and their 2 surviving children. And I took them back to where they had all been, kilometers away from where they were found, at the moment the tragedy struck. And we retraced everybody's steps and where they had been washed to, and to find out where they'd been swept and how and what had happened to them and where their daughter was ultimately lost. For over a year, they could not come to terms with why their daughter had been taken from them, and what had they done to deserve this, and why had they been punished. But returning together and revisiting, reviewing and talking with me and no doubt many others helped them develop a better understanding as to what had actually happened. We prayed and we lit a remembrance candle together, and they departed thinking that they had not been punished, but had been saved. And I like to hope that this gave them the strength that they needed to move forward as a family. For me and my family and the staff at the resort, we looked after each other. It was not easy, and there were times then and sometimes now when I feel incredibly sad. Nothing ever prepares us to witness and deal with such unpredictable and tragic and devastating events. But there is always hope, and we can be stronger than we ever know, and we are never ever alone, even when there are times when we feel utterly alone and at a loss. Thank you. And I hope that by the miracle of Zoom, shortly in a few minutes, I'll be able to join you in person, and we may have some questions to share and answers, or some topics to discuss or elaborate on. Please feel free to ask anything at all about the tsunami or any aspects of what I've said. Certainly it's emotional, but it's not, there's sadness to me, but it's not something I'm not uncomfortable to share or talk about. So please don't be afraid. We can talk about anything, and I look forward to seeing you shortly in a minute. Thank you.